Today we'll learn two key questions to ask repeatedly. The two key questions to ask repeatedly are, what does this mean to them? And why does that make sense to them? Put these on an index card. Practice using them locally in your home, community, or business when you don't understand what is happening or when there's a conflict. Try this out. But before we go further, a warning. In Kenya and Morocco, ordinary people watch the TV show Dallas and believe that America is just like that TV portrayal. Or in North Korea, where there is no Hollywood USA, no separate world of entertainment, the kind of fiction that comes out of Hollywood seems like documentary. That's the reason they may have hacked Sony Pictures. The meaning of the cyber hack was about perception of reality. Well, leading international business professor Nancy Adler tells this story, and I'm giving it to you to warn you that other culture people do not perceive the world the way you do, and to push you again to learn their perceptions. The story goes like this. A major North American company operating in Asia discovered that one of their local employees was stealing company property. The senior managers at the location, all of whom were expatriate Americans, had little doubt about the employee's guilt. And following the company's standard worldwide procedure, the North American managing director reported the case to the local police. Similar to the way they handled many other cases, they believed that it was best for the officials from the local culture to deal with thefts and similar violations in whatever way they found most appropriate. So they felt they were being culturally sensitive by allowing the local justice system to work and by not imposing the system of justice that came from their home culture, from North America. So the local police arrive at the company, they arrest the employee, and they take him to the local police station. They interrogate him according to local procedures. The employee confesses. The police then take him outside and shoot him dead. Well, the North American managing director was devastated for months. He was haunted by the fact that his action, taken because he thought it was culturally appropriate and fair, had led to the murder of an employee. The meanings of things and behaviors are not what you might think they are. I'll say that again. The meanings of things and of behaviors in another culture are not what you might think they are. Again, our two questions are, what does this mean to them, and why does that make sense to them? For this and that, you fill in the blank with whatever you're observing or asking about. Well, how will you get the answers to these questions? Well, you can ask a question. You can observe and figure it out. Observing takes longer, but will give you better insight. But far too often, we simply don't ask a question. Isn't this generally true in life? Well, this and that could be a Hollywood film or a picture on a cafe wall of a local pop culture star. This and that could be an occasion when someone smiles or doesn't. It could be a prayer rug or a ledger of names. This and that could be somebody agreeing 10 out of 10 times with some suggestion you make. Or it could be a worker who didn't show up for an essential meeting. Or it could be the marketing of a product in an entirely different manner from what you had all discussed. Again, what are the two questions? What does this mean to them? Why does that make sense to them? These two questions you need to keep actively in mind. Well, how? Write answers to them in the middle of the night. Check your answers with colleagues. Check them with a very trusted local informant. Assume nothing, judge little, and ask them repeatedly to yourself. Where do their answers come from? Well, they don't come from local media or the global internet, and they don't come from friends and associates who've traveled the world. They don't come from your environment and transportation system. Their answers don't come from your way of doing business or your economic system. They don't come from things your mom and early schooling taught you. They don't come from a position inside a world military power. They don't come from casual wealth where they have $5 in their pocket they can easily spend like you or I probably do. Their answers don't come from sights and sounds that you heard growing up in your city and your rural town. They don't come from your experience and your history. Cultural expert Rial Nolan from Purdue University advises the U.S. military on how to cross cultures, and he tells how a group of Russian managers acted in a training session. He said to them, imagine a village with different kinds of people in it. How would you raise the average income of the village? What different things could you do? Well, one person suggested bring in a factory, and another said, well, let's retrain the people for better jobs. And another, well, give the people loans to start small businesses. But finally, an older Russian spoke up. Too difficult. It would be easier just to shoot the rich. That old Russian's experience, his communist cultural experience, formed the basis of his response, which may have really happened at some point in his experience. You may think it sounds ridiculous. It makes sense to him, and you have to believe that. Let's zoom in on to them. What does this mean to them? A positive, affirming thumbs-up gesture in the USA or Asia is a major insult in Australia. If you move your head back and forth in Mumbai when you're asked if you like the food and you don't want any more, you'll surely get more. In many cultures, silence speaks loudly, and a pleasant "thank you, we'll consider your offer" means hey, goodbye, pal, the deal's over. The roots of meaning are usually far below these kinds of superficial behaviors. The second question also asks about them. Why does that make sense to them? All over the world, people do things that make sense to them. In India, they let cows roam the streets. In China, they cut out the backsides of babies' pants. People get married at 15. People argue loudly or keep silent for reasons that make lots of sense to them, often inexplicable sense because they cannot tell you why they act the way they do. It's what works in that culture. Did you ever say, stop acting like a child, to a child? Crazy adults say that. A child's behavior makes sense to that child, so they act like a child. When you're in the other's country or culture, their meanings and their ways are the meanings and the ways that make sense there. And that's pretty much all that counts there. Don't expect them to act like Americans. Don't expect them to attach American meanings to what's happening, or even to some directly spoken English language that they may use. These two excellent questions, what does this mean to them, and why does that make sense to them, will calm your frustration. They will make you a learner abroad and deliver you from being an idiot abroad. They will help you to learn to see behind the scenes. If you can get your other culture associate, your counterpart, to carry an index card on it with these two questions in his or her language, the two of you will go far together. Okay, 3 more illustrations. My Pakistani friend comes to America, to Texas no less. We're driving past a mall parking lot, and he starts to laugh uncontrollably. Brother, I said, what's going on? Well, he says, in London, when we go to park the car, you're always complaining about how difficult it is. My behavior never made sense to him until he saw hundreds of empty, Texas-sized free parking spaces. He'd not understood what made sense in my world. Well, second, my young Somali friend was getting thinner and thinner. He'd recently moved into a house with a number of single American guys. When he came to our house, he'd eat a lot. One day I was at his house near mealtime, and one guy besides Mohammed was there preparing a meal for himself. And unlike Mo, the individualistic American, was taking care just of himself. For Mo, a meal's not a transaction between one's stomach and some food. Mo wasn't eating unless he was eating with someone. He comes from a collectivistic culture, and it only makes sense to him to eat if he's among people who are gathered to eat. The meaning of eating a meal is always about having a social gathering. Well, thirdly, we lived in a bargaining Indian culture in London, and we ran a thrift store where we as Americans put a price tag on everything. An older woman came to the counter one day holding a necklace she'd found in the store. And she said, "Here, I will give you 50 pence for this." Well, it was marked £3. We tried to explain that we had fixed prices, and yet at every break in the conversation she would repeat, "I will give you 50 pence." For her, the meaning of the price tag was a place to begin bargaining. We never figured that out. And eventually, she went away empty-handed with a frown on her face. Had we said £2, we would have entered into a system that made sense to her. Be a learner. Learn these 2 questions. Practice them today. Keep them in mind, especially when you cross cultures. What does this mean to them? Why does that make sense to them? Well, they'll serve you well in North America also. Let me shift a little here and try to put this in the context of many places in the world where they have, well, what I will call a particular governing condition. The people we're talking about today, these other culture people, and remember this is fairly common, are seeking harmony and avoiding shame. This is the governing condition on their mind. They're seeking harmony and avoiding shame. For North Americans, right and wrong is often the governing condition. But for folks in these other cultures, right and wrong as moral values, moral rules, don't govern their sense of integrity. It's not that they don't have right and wrong, that's not what really governs their sense of integrity. Nor do right and wrong provide the basis for their unity. Their harmony, their getting along together, that's not what provides the basis. Instead, honor is most important. They're eager to protect your respectability and their own, and they're eager to avoid anything that will put you or them and their family and country in a bad light if you're truly part of their group, their collective. The appearance of getting along well together, harmony, is vital to a civil society. That's their governing condition. It's a central processing unit at the core of their cultural engine. In this instance, that central core is harmony and shame. I protect the character or honor of our group, usually extended family, in and above everything else, all the time, in the marketplace, among friends and strangers. And when you become part of my circle, I do the same for you. Okay, another example. One time in our 90% Indian Pakistani neighborhood in London, my wife was hosting an event. And in the course of the event, participants walked up to the table where the food was being served, and Donna asked that everyone wait until later to take the desserts, which they would do together after the meal. So an older friend, Usha, walked up and was about to take desserts ahead of time. And so as she reached for the cake, Donna said, graciously, but fairly directly, "Oh, can we wait until everyone else is ready?" Well, other people heard this, and yet while Donna was expressing her own cultural egalitarianism and rule setting, whatever, Usha was quite offended, and for some weeks actually. And she replied, "Well, you know, I'm not a child." Honor belongs to the elderly, and what they do is the rule. Usha had been shamed. Consider your clear sense of right and wrong. An American enters a culture where bribes are commonplace, or there's a detailed accounting. There's no detailed accounting for the $500 that's handed to a supervisor to get a task done. The Americans thinking about right and wrong has to be very frustrating. Yet in the other culture, where the governing condition is harmony and avoidance of shame, why is the detailed accounting not important? And how will the American approach the bribe? Consider, you'll deal with workers who go to sleep and wake up driven by the desire to protect their honor and their family's honor as an obligation, above all other moral values and responsibility. If mom's sick and there are four sisters to care for her, her son still might not show up at work. After all, he only has so many days on earth to pay his respects. I know a guy, he quit his job several months in advance of his mother's death while she was ill to care for her. Imagine striking a deal with somebody, your peer from another culture, who's more concerned about your honor than about legalities, or the other culture who might be bewildered by your need to get it right by using some objective standard, whether law or contract or even machine specifications, when to them it's most important to come out looking right among other people. So ask those two questions. What does this mean to them? Why does that make sense to them? And then look for some basic governing condition. What's driving the meanings and the sense making? Perhaps a desire to avoid shaming or being shamed, and a deeply enculturated obligation to appear harmonious.